The explosion lit up the darkness of space like a dying star. Admiral Thexler watched from his command ship as another Federation cruiser broke apart under Vraxian fire. The pieces scattered across the void, joining the debris field that marked weeks of desperate fighting. He closed his eyes for a moment. That made 17 ships lost in the past 3 days. His fleet was down to 40% strength. The Vraxian horde showed no signs of stopping. The Kelthera war zone stretched across 3 star systems. Once it had been Federation territory. Now it was contested space, filled with burning ships and shattered dreams. The Vraxians attacked in massive swarms, throwing hundreds of vessels at every engagement. Their tactics were simple and brutal. They overwhelmed any defense through sheer numbers. Thexlar's tactical officer spoke quietly. The reptilian officer's voice carried worry that military discipline could not hide. Another Vraxian fleet was forming on the edge of the system. Sensor readings showed at least 200 contacts. Maybe more. The admiral looked at his remaining ships. 43 vessels against 200. The mathematics were clear. They could not win this fight. His communication console lit up. The Federation High Council was calling an emergency meeting. Thexler connected to the channel and saw the faces of various council members appear on his screen. Councillor Muravan spoke first. The insectoid's compound eyes reflected the light of distant battles. The situation was unsustainable, Muravan stated. The council had reviewed all tactical reports. The recommendation was clear. They should abandon the Kelthera war zone and establish a new defensive line 3 systems back. Thexlar felt his scales tighten. Retreat meant giving up millions of civilians. It meant losing strategic resources that the Federation desperately needed. But what choice did they have? His ships were bleeding crew and supplies. Another week of fighting would leave nothing but wreckage. Then Ambassador Kyungmin spoke. The human representative had been quiet throughout most council sessions. Humans were still new to the Galactic Federation. They had made contact only 5 years ago, and had mostly observed rather than participated in galactic affairs. Kyungmin was a middle-aged human, with graying hair and calm eyes. She spoke with careful precision. Humanity had been following the war against the Vraxians. They understood the Federation was facing a critical moment. If the Council would permit it, humanity would like to contribute to the defense of Kelthera. Councillor Muravan's antennae twitched with what might have been surprise or skepticism. The Council appreciated humanity's offer, but they had to be realistic. The Vraxians had been fighting for decades. They had destroyed civilizations with thousands of years of military experience. What could one human ship accomplish? Kyungmin smiled slightly. Perhaps nothing. Perhaps everything. The only way to know was to try. She requested permission for humanity's warship to join Admiral Thexlar's fleet. The council debated for several minutes. Finally, they agreed. At this point, any additional support could not make the situation worse. Permission was granted. Thexlar returned his attention to the tactical display. The Vraxian fleet was moving closer. They would be in weapons range within 2 hours. He ordered his ships to prepare for combat. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. 40 minutes later, something appeared on his sensors. A single contact emerging from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. The sensor officer announced it was broadcasting human identification codes. The human warship had arrived. Thexlar pulled up the visual feed. The human ship looked nothing like Federation vessels. It was smaller than he expected. Federation dreadnoughts stretched over 3 kilometers in length. This ship measured perhaps 1 kilometer. Its design was angular and efficient, with none of the elegant curves that marked most galactic shipbuilding. The ship moved steadily toward the Federation fleet. It made no grand announcements. It sent no formal greetings. It simply took up a position on the fleet's outer edge and waited. Thexlar felt disappointment settle over him like a heavy blanket. This was humanity's contribution? One small ship against a Vraxian horde. He understood now why humans had stayed out of the war. They simply did not have the military capability to make a difference. Inside the human warship Tagukum, Captain Daehyun sat in his command chair and studied the battlefield. He was a man in his mid-40s with sharp eyes and calm hands. 20 years of military service had taught him to see patterns where others saw chaos. Commander Heejin stood at the tactical station. She was younger than the captain by a decade, but her mind worked like a precision instrument. She had already analyzed the Vraxian attack patterns from the past 3 days. The data told an interesting story. The Vraxians relied on overwhelming force and coordinated assaults. Their ships moved in tight formations, supporting each other with overlapping fire. It was effective against enemies who fought the same way, but it created vulnerabilities that someone with different training might exploit. Dr. Jiwan reviewed the sensor data from her science station. She noted the composition of Vraxian ship hulls, the energy signatures of their weapons, and the communication frequencies they used. Every piece of information was valuable. Every detail could mean the difference between victory and defeat. Lieutenant Borum ran final checks on the weapon systems. The young officer was precise and methodical. Every railgun was loaded. Every missile tube was ready. The drone bays were fully stocked. Everything was prepared. Daehyun listened to his crew's reports and felt satisfied. They were ready. More importantly, they understood what needed to be done. The Federation had been fighting this war with one set of rules. Humanity was about to introduce them to a different playbook. The sensor alarm sounded across both the Federation fleet and the Tegukum. The Vraxian assault was beginning. 300 warships were accelerating toward the Federation line. It was the largest attack wave they had launched in weeks. Admiral Thexler felt his heart sink. 300 ships against his 43. The mathematics became even worse. He opened a channel to his fleet and prepared to give the order to retreat. Better to save what they could than lose everything. Then Captain Daehyun's voice came through on the command frequency. His tone was calm and professional. He requested that the Federation fleet hold position. The Tegukum would handle the initial engagement. Thexlar almost laughed. 1 ship against 300? It was madness. But something in the human captain's voice made him pause. There was no bravado, no false heroism, just calm certainty. Against his better judgment, Thexlar gave the order. The Federation fleet would hold position and observe. On the Tegukum, Daehyun turned to his crew. Commander Heejin had the tactical solution ready. Lieutenant Borum had weapons primed. Dr. Jiwon had identified the optimal countermeasure frequencies. Everything was in place. Daehyun gave 2 simple orders. Lieutenant Borum would deploy countermeasures. Commander Heejin would initiate pattern Sigma. The Vraxian fleet rushed forward like a tidal wave of metal and fire. 300 ships against 1. The outcome seemed certain. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity had not spent 5 years observing for nothing. They had been studying, learning, preparing, and now they were ready to show what human warfare really meant. The Vraxian fleet charged forward like hungry predators. 300 warships moved in perfect coordination, their weapons already charging for the killing blow. Admiral Thexlar watched his tactical display and prepared for the worst. The human ship would be destroyed in seconds. Then his fleet would follow. But something strange happened. The Tegukum did not fire its main weapons. Instead, the ship released thousands of small objects from ports along its hull. The objects spread out rapidly, creating a cloud of contacts on every sensor in the system. Thexlar's sensor officer reported confusion. The objects were too small to be missiles. They were not broadcasting weapon signatures. What were they? Commander Heejin watched her tactical board with satisfaction. The drones were deploying exactly as planned. Each one was the size of a small cargo container, packed with electronic warfare systems and maneuvering thrusters. Individually, they were harmless. Together, they were devastating. The drones spread across the battlefield in carefully calculated patterns. They positioned themselves between Vraxian ships, above them, below them. Within 30 seconds, they had created a 3-dimensional network that covered the entire enemy formation. Then they activated. Every drone began broadcasting interference on multiple frequencies. They jammed communication channels. They spoofed sensor returns. They created false targeting data. The Vraxian fleet suddenly found itself blind and deaf in the middle of a battle. On the Vraxian command ship, the fleet coordinator stared at his screens in disbelief. His tactical display showed friendly ships in positions where sensors reported empty space. Enemy contacts appeared and disappeared randomly. Communication with other vessels cut out completely. He tried to issue orders to the fleet. Nothing. The communication network had collapsed. 300 ships were now operating independently, unable to coordinate their movements or share targeting information. The perfect Vraxian formation began to break apart. Ships veered off course to avoid collisions with vessels they could not track accurately. Others fired at sensor ghosts. The overwhelming coordination that made their swarm tactics effective simply vanished. Captain Daehyun watched the chaos unfold and allowed himself a small smile. Humanity had spent centuries developing electronic warfare. They had fought wars where information was more valuable than firepower. The Federation and the Vraxians had powerful weapons and strong shields, but they had never learned to fight in the dark. Commander Hyejin opened a channel to the Federation fleet. She transmitted precise firing solutions to each ship. The data showed exactly where Vraxian vessels were located and which ones had lost defensive coordination. Admiral Thexlar received the data and quickly understood. The human ship had turned the battlefield into chaos for the enemy, while providing perfect clarity to Federation forces. It was brilliant. It was terrifying. It was like nothing he had ever seen. He gave the order. The Federation fleet opened fire. Energy beams and missiles struck Vraxian ships that could not coordinate their shields or return fire effectively. The enemy vessels tried to respond, but without their network they could not focus their overwhelming numbers on single targets. They shot at shadows while real threats destroyed them one by one. Lieutenant Borum activated the Tegukum's railgun batteries. The weapons were different from standard Federation energy weapons. They fired solid projectiles accelerated to incredible speeds using electromagnetic force, simple physics, simple engineering. Devastating results. The railgun rounds punched through Vraxian armor with brutal efficiency. Energy shields that could deflect particle beams and lasers could not stop solid mass traveling at a significant fraction of light speed. The projectiles tore through hulls, shredded engines, and crippled weapons systems. Borum worked with focused precision. Each shot was calculated. Each target was selected for maximum tactical impact. She did not waste ammunition on already disabled ships. She targeted vessels that still posed a threat to Federation forces. Dr. G1 monitored the results from her science station. The Vraxian fleet was collapsing faster than predicted. Their communication network remained completely disrupted. Individual ships were trying to retreat, but without coordination they could not execute an organized withdrawal. 5 minutes into the engagement, 50 Vraxian ships were destroyed or disabled. 10 minutes in, the number reached 100. The remaining vessels finally did what their instincts demanded. They ran. The Vraxian fleet broke apart completely. Ships fled in every direction, desperate to escape the invisible network that had destroyed their tactical advantage. Some collided with each other in their panic. Others were picked off by Federation weapons as they exposed their engines during retreat. 15 minutes after the engagement began, it was over. The battlefield was littered with Vraxian wreckage. The Federation fleet had not lost a single ship. Not one. Admiral Thexlar sat in stunned silence. His tactical officer reported the numbers. 53 Vraxian ships confirmed destroyed, 42 disabled, the rest scattered across 2 star systems in complete disarray. 1 human ship. 15 minutes. Complete victory. Thexlar opened a communication channel to the Tegukum. His voice was steady, but his mind was racing. He needed to understand what had just happened. He demanded an explanation. Captain Daehyun appeared on the screen. The human looked as calm as if he had just completed a routine patrol. He explained in simple terms. Humanity called it network warfare. The Vraxians relied on coordination in overwhelming numbers. Take away their ability to coordinate, and their numbers became a liability instead of an advantage. Ambassador Kyungmin joined the conversation from her position on the Federation Council channel. She elaborated on Daehyun's explanation. Humans had spent thousands of years fighting wars. Not against aliens, against each other. They had learned every possible way to disrupt, deceive, and defeat an enemy. They had developed tactics for situations where they were outnumbered and outgunned. Counselor Moraven spoke up. The insectoid's voice carried a mixture of admiration and concern. This was impressive, certainly. But surely the Vraxians would adapt. They would develop countermeasures. They would find ways to fight through the interference. Dr. Jiwon responded to that concern. She explained that humans had been playing that game for centuries. Electronic warfare and counter-warfare, jamming and anti-jamming. It was an endless cycle of innovation. The Vraxians would need decades to catch up to where humanity was now, and humans would not stop developing new techniques. Admiral Thexlar felt something he had not experienced in months. Hope. If humans could do this with one ship, what could they accomplish with more? Perhaps the war against the Vraxians was not lost after all. His tactical officer interrupted the conversation. New contacts were appearing on long-range sensors. A lot of them. The officer's voice was tense as he provided identification. It was the Vraxian Ravager fleet. Thexlar felt his hope drain away as quickly as it had appeared. The Ravagers were not like normal Vraxian forces. They were elite units with heavily armored ships designed to absorb incredible amounts of damage. Federation fleets had engaged Ravagers 3 times in the past year. All 3 engagements had ended in Federation defeat. The Ravagers were coming, and they were coming because they had noticed the human ship. The Vraxians wanted to eliminate this new threat before it could change the course of the war. Captain Daehyun studied the incoming sensor data. Commander Heejin was already running tactical projections. Lieutenant Borum checked ammunition reserves. Dr. Jiwon analyzed the composition of Ravager ship hulls from previous engagement records. The Tagukum had won its first battle. Now it would face its first real test. The galaxy was watching, and humanity was just getting started. The Vraxian Ravager fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel like ancient monsters from nightmare. 12 massive battleships appeared on sensors, each one 3 times larger than standard Vraxian warships. Their hulls were coated in dense alloy plating that made them look like floating fortresses. Admiral Thexlar felt old memories surface. Memories he had tried to forget. He had faced Ravagers before. The experience still haunted his dreams. He opened a priority channel to Captain Daehyun. His voice was grave as he explained what they were facing. Ravagers were not like normal warships. Their armor was specifically designed to absorb and dissipate energy weapons fire. Federation particle beams and lasers could barely scratch their hulls. Previous engagements had lasted hours and cost dozens of ships just to disable a single Ravager. The last time Thexlar had fought Ravagers, he commanded a fleet of 70 ships. By the time the battle ended, only 32 remained. The Ravagers had lost 3 vessels. 3. Captain Daehyun listened to the Admiral's warning without interruption. When Thexlar finished, Daehyun asked a simple question. What were the Ravager hulls made from? Dr. Jiwon pulled up the analysis from previous encounters. The Ravager armor used layered alloys with high thermal dispersion properties. Energy weapons spread their force across the entire hull, instead of concentrating damage on a single point. It was brilliant engineering, almost unbeatable with conventional tactics. Almost Jiwon noted something interesting in the hull composition reports. The armor plating was segmented. It had to be. Ships needed flexible joints for maneuvering systems and propulsion. Those connection points were less protected than the main hull. They were still strong, but they were the weakest parts of an otherwise perfect defense. Commander Heejin studied the tactical data and proposed a new pattern. Instead of trying to punch through the main armor, they would target the joints. Concentrated kinetic strikes on propulsion connections, make the ships unable to maneuver. A Ravager that could not turn was just a floating target. Daehyun approved the plan. He had one additional requirement. The Tagukum would not engage head-on. They would use speed and maneuverability to their advantage. The Federation had been trying to fight Ravagers like they were normal capital ships. Humanity would treat them like what they really were. Slow, heavily armored obstacles that could be disabled with the right approach. Admiral Thexlar wanted to protest. The plan sounded reckless, but he had watched the Tagukum destroy a Vraxian assault fleet in 15 minutes. Perhaps it was time to trust human experience. The Ravager fleet moved into attack formation. They advanced slowly and deliberately, their massive weapons charging. They showed no fear. Why would they? They were predators and they knew it. The Tagukum accelerated. Not toward the Ravagers, toward the debris field left by the previous battle. The ship dove into the wreckage at speeds that made Thexlar's crew gasp. Human pilots were navigating through destroyed ships and floating metal like it was empty space. The Ravagers tried to track the human ship, but their targeting system struggled with all the debris creating sensor interference. The Tagukum used the wreckage as cover, appearing and disappearing from their scopes. Then the human ship did something unexpected. It used a gravitational slingshot maneuver around a large piece of destroyed station to change direction instantly. The Ravagers had committed to firing at where the ship was supposed to be. Their massive energy beams hit nothing but empty space and debris. The Tegukum emerged from the debris field behind the Ravager formation. Lieutenant Borum had perfect firing solutions on 3 ships. She fired. The railgun volleys struck with surgical precision, not at the main armor, at the joint sections where propulsion systems connected to the hull. The kinetic rounds hit with incredible force, and unlike energy weapons, their impact did not spread across the entire structure. It concentrated on the exact point of contact. Metal screamed and buckled. Connection points shattered under the impact. 3 Ravagers suddenly lost control of their maneuvering thrusters. They tried to compensate with remaining systems, but the damage was too severe. They began drifting, unable to properly orient themselves for combat. The other Ravagers turned to engage the human ship, but the Tegukum was already moving. It used another debris field for cover, emerging at a different angle. More railgun fire, more precise hits on vulnerable joints. 2 more Ravagers lost mobility. Captain Daehyun watched the tactical display with calm focus. The Ravagers were powerful, but they were built for sustained frontal combat. They were designed to absorb damage and destroy enemies through overwhelming firepower. They were not designed to fight an opponent that refused to stand still. Commander Hyejin coordinated with the Federation fleet. She transmitted targeting data for the disabled Ravagers. The Federation ships moved in and focused their fire on the immobilized vessels. Without mobility, the Ravagers could not bring all their weapons to bear. They became vulnerable. Admiral Thexler watched in amazement as his fleet systematically destroyed ships that had seemed invincible. The Tegukum darted around the battlefield, disabling Ravager after Ravager with precise kinetic strikes. It was like watching a small predator take down much larger prey by attacking weak points and avoiding direct confrontation. The Ravager commander finally understood the threat. These humans fought differently from any opponent the Vraxians had encountered. They did not try to match strength with strength. They found weaknesses and exploited them ruthlessly. He tried to order a tactical withdrawal, but it was too late. 8 of his 12 ships were disabled. The remaining 4 could not protect themselves and retreat simultaneously. The Federation fleet was pressing the attack with renewed confidence. 28 minutes after the engagement began, the last Ravager lost power. 12 elite warships that had terrorized the Federation for months were now floating wrecks. The Tegukum had not taken a single hit. Counselor Miraven's voice came through on the command channel. The insectoid's tone was different now, less skeptical, more cautious. She asked the question that everyone was thinking. How did humanity develop such advanced combat tactics? Ambassador Kyungmin's response was quiet but honest. Humanity had fought wars for thousands of years, not against alien species, against themselves. Humans had learned to fight enemies with equivalent technology. They had learned to win battles when outnumbered. They had learned to find advantages in situations that seemed hopeless. Every major war in human history had been a laboratory for new tactics. Every conflict had pushed military innovation forward. By the time humanity reached space, they had millennia of hard-earned combat experience. They knew how to fight because they had never stopped fighting. The Federation had been at peace for generations before the Vraxians arrived. Their military doctrine was theoretical. Humanity's doctrine was written in blood and survival. Admiral Thexlar felt something close to fear. Not fear of the Vraxians, fear of what humanity represented, a species that had weaponized its own brutal history, a civilization that had turned internal conflict into external advantage. His tactical officer interrupted with urgent news. Long-range sensors had detected something massive entering the system, something that dwarfed even the Ravagers. The sensor analysis came back. It was the Vraxian Dreadclaw, a Fortress-class vessel, the largest warship in the Vraxian fleet, a ship that had destroyed entire Federation battle groups without taking significant damage. It was coming. And it was coming for the human ship that had humiliated the Vraxian military twice in one day. Captain Daehyun looked at the sensor readout showing the approaching fortress. Commander Hyejin was already calculating potential tactics. Lieutenant Borum was checking ammunition reserves. Dr. Jiwan was analyzing what little data existed on Dreadclaw capabilities. The Tegukum had proven humanity's tactical superiority. Now they would face their greatest challenge, and the galaxy would learn if human innovation could overcome impossible odds. The Dreadclaw emerged from faster-than-light travel like a mobile planet. Admiral Thexler had seen large ships before, He had commanded dreadnoughts. He had fought alongside massive carriers. But nothing prepared him for the sheer scale of what now appeared on his sensors. The Fortress-class vessel measured over 15 kilometers in length. Its hull bristled with weapon systems, hundreds of gun emplacements, dozens of missile batteries, energy cannons that could destroy cruisers with single shots. It was not a warship. It was a mobile military base designed to break any defense through overwhelming firepower. Thexelar's tactical officer provided the intelligence report on Dreadclaw capabilities. The fortress had energy shields that regenerated faster than most weapons could damage them. It had armor thick enough to ignore anything except sustained bombardment from multiple capital ships. 3 Federation battle groups had engaged a Dreadclaw 2 years ago. Only 4 ships made it out alive. The Admiral opened a channel to Captain Daehyun. His voice was heavy with resignation. They should evacuate. There was no shame in retreating from an impossible fight. The Dreadclaw was not a tactical target. It was a strategic asset that required fleet-level response. One ship could not win this battle. Captain Daehyun listened politely. Then he asked Dr. Ji-won about the shield regeneration. How did it work? Ji-won pulled up all available data on Dreadclaw technology. The shield system was actually distributed throughout the ship. Instead of one central generator, it used hundreds of localized power nodes. When one section took damage, nearby nodes redirected energy to reinforce that area. It was brilliant design. It meant the shields could regenerate almost instantly, but it also meant the system was a network. And networks could be overloaded. Commander Haijin saw the tactical possibility immediately. If they could hit multiple shield sections simultaneously, the power nodes would try to reinforce all of them at once. The system would have to choose which areas to protect. If they overwhelmed it with enough simultaneous strikes, the entire network might collapse. It was dangerous. It was probably impossible, but it was the only chance they had. Daehyun opened a channel to the Federation fleet. He needed their help. Not to destroy the Dreadclaw, not yet. He needed them to keep the fortress focused on the wrong threats. Admiral Thexelar wanted to refuse. Attacking the Dreadclaw was suicide. But he had thought the Ravagers were invincible too. He had thought one ship could not make a difference. He had been wrong both times. He gave the order. The Federation fleet would support the human plan. The Dreadclaw advanced into the system slowly and deliberately. Its commander knew there was no need to rush. The fortress had time. It had power. It had certainty of victory. The small human ship that had caused so much trouble would be eliminated. Then the Federation remnants would be crushed. The Kelthera war zone would belong to the Vraxians. The Federation fleet spread out into attack formation. It looked like they were preparing for a desperate last stand. 43 ships against an unstoppable fortress. It would be a short battle. The Federation ships opened fire. Energy beams and missiles struck the Dreadclaw's forward shields. The impacts flared brilliantly against the protective barriers. The shields absorbed the damage easily and regenerated within seconds. It was like throwing stones at a mountain, but the Federation fleet kept firing. They concentrated their attacks on the forward sections, drawing the Dreadclaw's attention. The fortress turned its massive weapons toward them. It began returning fire with devastating effect. Federation ships took evasive action, their shields straining under the barrage. While the Dreadclaw focused on the fleet above, something was happening below. The Tegukum had gone completely silent. No active sensors, no weapons charging, no engine signatures. The ship drifted through space like debris, using the Dreadclaw's own massive bulk to hide from passive scans. The human ship approached from underneath, using the fortress's size against it. The Dreadclaw was so large that its sensors had blind spots, areas where the hull itself blocked detection. The Tegukum found one of those blind spots and stayed there, invisible and patient. Inside the ship, Lieutenant Borum armed humanity's most closely guarded secret. Nuclear-pumped kinetic penetrators, weapons that combined fusion reactions with solid projectiles. The explosions provided acceleration. The solid cores provided penetration. Together, they could punch through armor that nothing else could breach. The Federation had banned nuclear weapons in space warfare centuries ago. Too dangerous, too destructive, too barbaric. Humanity had never signed those treaties. Humans had learned that survival sometimes required using weapons that civilized societies found distasteful. The Tegukum maneuvered into position directly beneath the Dreadclaw's reactor section. This was the most heavily shielded part of the fortress. Multiple layers of energy barriers protected the power core. It was considered impenetrable. Commander Hyejin coordinated the timing perfectly. The Federation fleet executed a synchronized attack on 6 different shield sections simultaneously. The Dreadclaw's power network responded exactly as predicted. Energy redirected to reinforce all 6 areas at once. The reactor shielding weakened for just a moment. 3 seconds at most. Lieutenant Borum fired everything. 20 penetrators launched at point-blank range, their nuclear pumps igniting in sequence. The projectiles accelerated to incredible speeds in the fraction of a second it took them to cross the distance to the fortress hull. The first penetrator punched through the weakened outer shield. The second went deeper. The third deeper still. They carved a tunnel through layer after layer of armor and shielding, each explosion clearing the way for the next projectile. The 20th penetrator reached the reactor housing itself. The explosion was contained, channeled, focused. It did not destroy the reactor. It disrupted the power distribution network that fed the entire fortress. On the Dreadclaw's bridge, every system shut down simultaneously. The shields collapsed. The weapons went offline. The engine stopped. Emergency power failed to activate because the distribution network was destroyed. The fortress became a dead hulk in seconds. The Federation fleet stopped firing. Every sensor operator stared at their screens in disbelief. The Dreadclaw floated helplessly, its lights going dark section by section. The invincible fortress was dead. Admiral Thexlar could not speak. His mind could not process what his eyes were seeing. The Dreadclaw, the ship that had destroyed 3 battle groups, the fortress that had never been defeated. It was floating lifeless in space, killed by a single human warship. Counselor Maraven's voice came through on the command channel. The insectoid sounded shaken. She asked the question that every Federation officer was thinking. What kind of civilization builds weapons like this? Ambassador Kyungmin's response was quiet, but carried across every channel in the system. One that learned survival is not about playing fair. It is about making sure you are still standing when the dust settles. It is about using every advantage, every innovation, every weapon necessary to protect your people, she continued. Humanity did not develop these weapons to conquer. They developed them because they had no choice. When you fight wars against enemies with equivalent technology, you learn to find edges. You learn that mercy on the battlefield means death for your people. You learn that the winner is not the one with the most honor. It is the one who survives. Admiral Thexlar finally understood. Humanity had not joined the war to help the Federation. They had joined to show the galaxy what real warfare looked like. They had revealed capabilities that made even their allies nervous. They had demonstrated that humans were not just another species seeking peace. They were predators who had chosen to be allies rather than conquerors. The choice of what they did with that capability was theirs. And that was more terrifying than any weapon. The Taegukum moved away from the dead fortress. Captain Daehyun's calm voice announced they were ready to continue operations. The battle for Kelthera was not over. There was more work to do. The galaxy watched, and the galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. News of the Dreadclaw's defeat spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Communication networks buzzed with the impossible story. A single human warship had destroyed the Vraxian fortress in minutes. Civilizations that had never heard the word humanity suddenly knew one name above all others: Taegukum. In the Kelthera war zone, something remarkable happened. The Vraxian forces began to withdraw. Not in organized retreat, not following orders. They simply left. Ship by ship, fleet by fleet, they abandoned positions they had held for months. For the first time in decades of warfare, the Vraxians showed fear. Admiral Thexlar watched the tactical display with mixed emotions. Relief that the immediate threat was gone. Concern about what humanity's display of power meant for the future. Pride that the Federation had survived against impossible odds. And underneath it all, a nagging question. What else were humans capable of? The Federation High Council convened an emergency session. Representatives from dozens of species filled the council chamber. The mood was tense. Counselor Miravan called the session to order and spoke directly to Ambassador Kyungmin. The insectoid's tone was formal but carried an edge of accusation. Humanity had revealed military capabilities far beyond what they had disclosed during first contact negotiations. They had weapons that violated Federation laws. They had tactical doctrines that suggested centuries of warfare. The Council needed transparency. What else was humanity hiding? Ambassador Kyung-min stood calmly before the assembled council. She had expected this conversation. She had prepared for it since the day humanity decided to reveal the Tegukum. She explained in clear terms, yes, humanity had kept its full military capabilities hidden during first contact. That was deliberate. Humans had learned through bitter experience that revealing strength too early invited aggression. They had watched the galaxy for 5 years. They had studied the Federation's conflicts. They had waited to see if they could trust these new neighbors. Trust had to be earned. On both sides, a representative from the Thalen Confederation interrupted. Their aquatic species had been one of the first to join the Federation. They asked the question bluntly. How many ships like the Tegukum did humanity possess? The council chamber fell silent. Every representative leaned forward. This was the answer they needed to hear. Ambassador Kyung-min did not hesitate. 47 ships of the Tegukum class were currently active in the human fleet. The Tegukum itself was actually one of the older models. Newer designs were more advanced. The council erupted in shocked conversation. 47 ships, each one capable of destroying Vraxian elite forces, each one carrying weapons that could disable Fortress-class vessels. The Federation's entire military had struggled against the Vraxians for years. Humanity had quietly built a fleet that could potentially end the war single-handedly. Councillor Miraven demanded order. She asked the crucial question. If humanity had this capability all along, why wait? Why watch the Federation suffer losses while holding back such power? Dr. Jiwan answered that question through a communication link from the Tegukum. She explained humanity's philosophy in simple terms. Humans did not build weapons to conquer. They built them so nobody could conquer them. For 5 years, they had observed the Federation. They needed to understand if this was an alliance worth protecting. The Vraxians had made the choice easy. They were aggressors seeking domination. The Federation, despite its flaws, genuinely wanted peace. Once humanity was certain of that, they committed. Completely. A counselor from the Miraxian Assembly spoke up. Their crystalline species valued logic above all else. They pointed out that humanity had effectively positioned themselves as the dominant military power in Federation space. What prevented humans from using that power to dictate terms, to demand concessions, to become conquerors themselves? Captain Daehyun joined the communication link. His voice was steady and clear. Nothing prevented it except human choice. That was the truth. Humanity had the capability to conquer. They had chosen not to. They would continue to choose not to as long as the Federation remained an alliance of equals rather than an empire. He continued. Humans understood power. They had wielded it against each other for millennia. They knew how it corrupted, how it twisted good intentions into tyranny. That history was why humanity valued freedom and autonomy so highly. They would defend those principles for themselves and for their allies. But there would be conditions. Humanity would assist the Federation in the war against the Vraxians. They would share tactical knowledge. They would coordinate military operations. However, they required complete operational autonomy. No restrictions on human tactics. No questions about specific weapon systems. No interference in how human ships conducted warfare. The council debated intensely. Some representatives argued against giving humans such freedom. Others pointed out they had no leverage to demand anything else. The Federation was losing the war. Human intervention had stopped Vraxian advances in a single day. Pride was less important than survival. Councillor Miraven finally called for a vote. The resolution was clear. The Federation officially requested humanity's full participation in the war. In exchange, human forces would operate with complete tactical autonomy as equal partners rather than subordinate allies. The vote passed. Not unanimously. Some species remained deeply uncomfortable with humanity's capabilities, but the majority recognized reality. The Vraxians were being pushed back. For the first time in years, the Federation had hope of victory. Admiral Thexlar received the Council's decision and immediately implemented it. He opened a formal channel to Captain Daehyun. The Federation fleet would coordinate with human forces. They would learn from human tactical doctrines. They would fight together as equals. Commander Hyejin began sharing tactical data with Federation commanders. The information was comprehensive. Network warfare principles, kinetic weapon applications, asymmetric combat strategies. The Federation officers absorbed it eagerly. They were learning to fight like humans, to think like humans, to win like humans. 3 days after the Dreadclaw's destruction, more human ships arrived in the Kelthera war zone. Not just one or two. 15 warships of various classes appeared on sensors. They took up positions throughout the sector, reinforcing Federation defenses and establishing patrol routes. The Vraxians attempted 2 more assaults on Federation positions. Both failed catastrophically. Human network warfare disrupted their coordination. Human kinetic weapons punched through their armor. Human tactics turned their numerical advantage into a liability. Within a week, the Vraxians stopped attacking entirely. Lieutenant Borum reviewed combat reports from across the sector. Human forces had engaged in 17 separate battles. 17 victories, 0 losses. The numbers were almost absurd, but they were real. The Tegukum prepared to depart Kelthera. Other human ships would maintain the sector's security. Captain Dahyun had new orders. The Federation High Command wanted human vessels deployed to 3 other critical war zones. Humanity was no longer an observer. They were the tip of the spear. Admiral Thexlar requested a final meeting with Captain Dahyun before the human ship departed. The 2 commanders met via communication link. Thexlar wanted to express gratitude, but the words felt inadequate. How do you thank someone for changing the course of a war? Dahyun simply nodded. Gratitude was unnecessary. Humanity had made a choice to stand with the Federation. They would honor that choice. But he wanted Thexlar to understand something important. The galaxy had changed. The old ways of warfare would no longer determine victory. Adaptability would. Innovation would. The willingness to learn and evolve would decide who survived and who did not. The Vraxians had learned that lesson the hard way. The Federation was learning it now. And humanity would continue to teach it to anyone who threatened peace. The Tegukum broke orbit and accelerated toward the system's edge. On the bridge, Lieutenant Borum asked Captain Dahyun if they had revealed too much too quickly. If showing their full capabilities might have been a mistake. Dahyun looked at the tactical display. It showed human warships spreading across Federation space, Vraxian forces in retreat across multiple sectors, Alliance species watching humanity with new respect and new wariness. He answered his weapons officer calmly. They had shown exactly what they wanted the galaxy to see. Humanity was not prey. They were predators who had chosen to be allies. That choice made them valuable friends and dangerous enemies. The galaxy had stopped in its tracks the moment the Tegukum arrived in the war zone. Every civilization now understood that humanity was not another minor species seeking protection. They were warriors with thousands of years of hard-earned expertise. They were innovators who turned every challenge into an advantage. They were survivors who refused to lose. And most importantly, they were allies who had proven their worth in blood and fire. The Tegukum jumped to faster-than-light travel. Behind it, the Kelthera war zone was finally at peace. Ahead, new battles waited, new challenges, new opportunities to show the galaxy what humanity meant when they made a promise. The war was far from over. But for the first time in years, everyone knew how it would end. The Vraxians had made a fatal mistake.